Hello and welcome to the Sandip Roy Show on Express Audio.
The Sandip Roy Show.
Put up your hand if in the last few years, every other social gathering you went to, someone was talking about bitcoins. And I would try to sound knowledgeable and fail miserably. Even now, I constantly get tagged by random people on tweets trying to get people to buy some cryptocurrency or the other. Posts popped up on people's Instagram profiles claiming they just bought a new car with their cryptocurrency gains. For those on the outside, there was a lot of FOMO at this bright, shiny, new, get-rich-quick opportunity that seemed to be taking India by storm. By the end of 2021, India had 15 homegrown cryptocurrency exchange platforms with more than 1.5 crore users. And not just in the big metros. Cryptocurrency's fastest growth was happening in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So was this the brave new financial revolution we've all been waiting for? Or yet another pyramid scheme waiting to go bust? Maybe a bit of both, because wherever there is money to be made, it will attract crime. A new book, Crypto Crimes Inside India's Best Kept Secret, goes into the underbelly of the cryptocurrency world. And we are joined from Oxford by its author, well-known business journalist Mitali Mukherjee. Mitali Mukherjee, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sandip. It's a pleasure to be here.
I will admit off the bat that I actually don't understand the technology of blockchains that underlie cryptocurrency, really. So I kind of need a cryptocurrency for dummies, basically. So could you explain what was the big attraction of cryptocurrency and why it was hailed as such a financial revolution?
Let me start by admitting I'm an expert at, and do not claim to be an expert at crypto at all. In fact, it's curious. I was speaking to someone else and a journalist about it, and he wrote back saying, I didn't know you were interested in crypto. I said, well, I'm not. I see myself as a very curious observer and certainly not an expert. Maybe we can break it up a little bit, which is that I think blockchain is sort of this enormous universe of the tech surrounding a lot of what we're doing today and a lot of what supports the systems that we work on, whether it's apps or anything else. I think crypto becomes a slightly smaller island within that. The reason I was attracted to this idea, Sandeep, is exactly that. It's the dualities that exist in this conversation about crypto. Because, you could be talking to people who are enthusiastic about it and they would say, this is the answer to financial democratization. This is the one lever that gives everyone equal access and opportunity. And then you would talk to people who don't believe in it and they would say, listen, it's a bunch of loonies. This is never going to fly. It's never going to stick. So I think it was that sort of, almost polar opposite opinions that I was getting that really drew me into exploring crypto.
And the reason why it was hailed as such a financial revolution and democratizing, as you put it, is because it sort of was taking the bank out of the process as the middleman to vouch for a transaction. So it was going to be just between me and you. We get to trust each other.
Exactly right. In fact, I think I would go a step further to say, for a lot of people, the evil or the problem as they see it is not just the bank, it's the central banker. So part of the criticism that you will hear when people are dissing at what the current financial structure is that, first of all, it's very geography centric. So a lot of how financial policy works emanates from what's happening in the US and what the Federal Reserve there decides to do. And secondly, it's really heavily sort of rail guarded by central banks. Central banks determine not just currency rates, but also, the currency in circulation, the rules of the game, what happens with interest rates. And I think in that sense, you're absolutely right. This completely circumvents banks. So essentially, think of it like a ledger that we would have in olden times, which was a register where you would pretty much write down, Sandeep gave me 20 rupees and I have to return 20 rupees. All that goes online. So it's a public ledger where there is proof that you and I have exchanged a trade, but it's only registered over there, which means that we don't need to go to a bank.
So in a sense, and you do actually go into that in the book, it's like the Hawala system.
So this is the one where I think I'm going to get a lot of crypto troll love once people start seeing the details of it. The problem with technology is that very quickly people figure out ways of misuse. And when you try to police it or check it, it's just the nature of the system that you're always many steps behind how fast it's actually evolving. And I think this quickly became a very, very efficient and elegant tool for Hawala. That became the biggest problem. And that's probably why a lot of central banks and policymakers are still quite uncomfortable with, this whole idea around crypto. Because there were no more borders, international or otherwise. There was no filter system. You could very easily put your, number two money, if you want to call it, or black money into crypto and then check out from somewhere else. That wasn't a problem at all. And I think in that sense, Hawala quickly became a very vibrant part of the crypto ecosystem.
So to step back a bit, Mitali, when you were looking at this, is there something unique about the attraction of crypto in India? Because as you point out, it seems to be hugely popular, not just in the expected tier 1 metro cities, but more so in tier 2. The rate of the new user registration is much faster in tier 2 cities. What do you think accounts for that?
So let's go back to the COVID pandemic, which is 2020 or 2019, 2020, which is when a lot of people were basically working from home. Some had most unfortunately lost their jobs, but essentially everyone was quite homebound. And that's where you really began to see the interest around crypto begin to pick up. So it's a lot of these young people from across different cities, and so much of it is by word of mouth, right? Someone told a mate, hey, there's this thing called crypto, there's this particular coin, and if you trade overnight, you can actually make sort of a 5-7% pop on a very small amount. I think that was the first big trigger, the fact that people had that time on their hands. The other one, I think is so much has happened and so much has evolved around the equity markets, Sandip, and people have been encouraged to be, invest in SIPs and start investing in the equities. But even that tends to still have a lot of barriers around it. You do need a certain level of sort of income to enter the equity market as an active participant. Now, here you had a situation where you could pretty much, as a young 23-year-old who didn't have too many savings, put in like 10,000 rupees. And then you make a little bit on that, and then you make a little bit more on that. And these were good enough gains, honestly, so it was appealing. It was quick. I think the big advantage of crypto is it's 24/7. It's always trading and it's always on. So a lot of these people would, spend their time in the morning doing their day job, and then in the evening they'd be trading. So it would be an app on their phone and it would be on their laptops. It was pretty much available when they wanted it. And I think that was huge for both tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
And in fact, crypto influencer interview says, log apna ghar chala rahe hai crypto se. So it's not just side income to, buy that fancy iPhone or a motorbike or something like this. Is part of crypto's appeal the lack of jobs?
I would hesitate to make a one-to-one correlation between unemployment and people trading crypto because honestly, I don't have enough data to stand by that outcome. But I will say it was a huge sort of over and above for people who were looking to make a bit of money. As I said, it was a universe which was far more welcoming than a lot of other financial instruments can be, especially for a younger generation. And I think, I'm sure we'll get to it later in the conversation, the tax changes kind of really hemorrhaged the Indian trading system quite badly. But till a point of time, people were trading this pretty much like you see people trading the stock market, just that there were much lower levels of entry and there were much bigger pops to be seen. I mean, the person that you mentioned, she's a crypto influencer, Sapna. She wasn't very comfortable in English. She was a first-time participant in the world of social media. So, this wasn't someone who, came in with a lot of bells and whistles saying, I'm very social media friendly, I know how to be an influencer, or, a lot of privilege backing her up. But here she was with a fantastic sort of following on YouTube and a following on Telegram. And she talked quite honestly about some of the gender barriers there as well, where when she started off, people were like, you're a woman, what do you know about this? But then some of her tips, if you want to call it that, or some of her calls actually worked out, which made her super popular.
Yeah, and she figured out this niche, as you say, where people who are not comfortable in English, like how do you explain crypto in Hindi? But all of that reminded me, Mitali, in some ways about and I don't know if I'm making an incorrect analogy here, but it's like cheap mobile data allowed people in India to sort of access the internet off their smartphones, bypassing the need of a laptop or desktop altogether. And I wonder if this is also was a similar way of accessing the financial market and making money, bypassing the regular financial institutions altogether.
Greed is a very powerful motivating force. And for a lot of people, I think whatever financial instrument they may be investing in, I think that becomes a huge motivator for where they would like to invest. It was a process of bypassing systems, but it was also a certain level of gullibility, saying, oh, that looks like a good trick, let me try it. Because, it's an equal part, Sandeep. Like you'll see a lot of people lauding a good pick, but you'll see them really sort of smashing down if it doesn't work, saying, oh, this person is a fraud. Why did they lead us down this path? And why did they recommend this coin? It hasn't worked. So it kind of goes both ways.
What is it recommending coins? So while Bitcoin is the gold standard, the big daddy in there are many alternative cryptocurrencies. Now, okay, so stocks, I understand. They belong to different companies selling different products. And when you're playing the stock market, you're betting on sort of which products there'll be more of a demand for, which stock will rise, which stock might fall. But when you hear about all these cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, Dogecoin, Tether, Cardano, Shiba Inu, all of these, what's the difference between all these cryptocurrencies? Because to me, they're not selling anything.
Yeah. And I think, the benchmark is considered Bitcoin, right? Like that's gold standard, which in a universe of pretty low rules, is like, okay, fine, we'll take Bitcoin. And I want to go back to that same 2019-20 period where it really became completely loony after a while. Sandeep, there was a new coin pretty much every day, if not even more frequent than that, where you didn't know the inherent value. You didn't often know who was pitching this. I'll give you an interesting example from, around that time. Someone launched a coin modeled around the Squid Game show on Netflix, and that became really popular. They raised a lot of money and then they just went MIA. The Doji coin is sort of one of those where there's smoke coming out of your ears trying to understand it as someone who's been looking at the financial markets, where it was essentially just a whim and fancy of a man called Elon Musk, who we now know courtesy Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X, where he just came up with this coin and then he started pitching it and people started running behind it saying, oh, if Elon Musk is saying Doji coin is the good one to buy, then we should follow it. There was a crazy period in time where I think he even offered to either buy, part of Twitter with Doji coins or something like that, with no explanation of what the inherent value is. In fact, as we speak today, because the book sort of trails a lot of events up till 22, in 23 now, I understand the most popularly traded coins in India, it's no longer Bitcoin because it's so damn expensive. It is coins like Doji coin. But you're absolutely right. There is no real parameter of what the inherent value is. There is no asset to back this against. There is no predicted value to back this against. If you were to look at sort of a 5-year graph of something like cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, the number of jagged edges you see there, I think, are descriptive of the fact that highs and lows can be anything. Anyone can decide that. It's not really a function of any predictability.
In fact, that's where it gets increasingly confusing to look at from the outside because, and I'm including myself here, you're surrounded by people who seem to constantly talk about making money all the time of Bitcoins. And yet at the same time, you're constantly being told this is very risky, this is very risky, this is very risky. But those people are never talking about losing money.
I mean, they are making money, but I think what they're not sharing in complete transparency is how much money they're losing, because really people get their fingers burnt quite badly. I think one big example of that was what happened towards the end of last year, when FTX, which is really considered the largest global exchange, really collapsed. Sam Bankman-Fried, the man who was running this, is now sentenced to over 20 years in prison for financial fraud. I think that was an apocalyptic moment for crypto, and the kind of collapse that you saw in prices. I mean, there is no way anyone who had anything to do with crypto can put a hand on their heart and say that they didn't lose significant amounts of money in that time. It's just that because, as you were saying, the lows and the highs are so enormous, there's a chance you could recover that money. But then again, it's the same thing, right? What is your capacity? So if I'm a young trader sitting in, I don't know, Ranchi or Jharkhand, and I put 20,000 rupees in, I don't have a lot of money to lose.
So to get to the crime part, was there a particular crypto crime that drew you to this story? Since you said this is not like your regular field of interest, so was there a gateway crime, as it were?
There was. It's a story which is in the book, and I was speaking to another young journalist, and then he said, "Ma'am, I just came back from a really interesting assignment." And I said, "Tell me about it." And it's this man called Bunty, based in Uttar Pradesh, who is this small-time sort of petty thief, if you will, who befriends another man and finds out that he has this mythical creature called crypto, with which he's made a lot of money on his phone. And Bunty, then goes on to make good friends with this man, goes over to his house. When he goes over to his house, he arrives there with a katta, which is basically, a revolver, as it's called in local language there, holds that to his head, and says, "Now you transfer all your crypto coins from your phone into my account." He was arrested, but then let off because I think both families reached some resolution. But when I heard the story, it was such a perfect mix of, a new age technology and good old Indian jugaad, which was like, I want the money. How do I get it? Here's a revolver. Hand it over, That I think really got me going to see what's happening here. Obviously, more people know about this than is talked about. And obviously, it's not going very well in terms of regulation.
But you quote statistics that show that globally, crime is increasingly became a diminishing part of the crypto ecosystem. Was that true in India? Do we keep records?
I think the big revelation for me, Sandeep, is first of all, there's different kinds of crime. So, for example, when I began exploring this, one of the things I was looking at and that was suggested to me is, has crypto become huge in terms of terrorism or terror financing? On that, there's actually very low data and it seems prevalence in a country like India. So it's not that it's been very huge. On other kinds of crime, it has come off a little bit. But I think the number one statistic in terms of crime and the one that India has been probably one of the most vulnerable countries to is ransomware. Just as a quick explanation of that, essentially it means I hack into your system, I take control of your data and I scramble it, which means that you can't access or read any of your sensitive files and I've locked it. And I say that, I will only hand you the key back or unscramble this in return for money, which is almost 99% of the time in cryptocurrencies. I think that was a shocking bit for me, that very, very large, successful organizations had been victims of ransomware. In many occasions, they had neither made that public nor transparent, which I think is a disservice to your investors and users. In many cases, it wasn't clear how that data was finally retrieved, and it seemed like payment had been made. Ransomware, I think, is the one space that's still growing even in 2023. And I think Indian companies, for whatever reason, probably because they need a huge system upgrade, are one of the most vulnerable.
And people read crypto crimes will find out that some of these companies are day-to-day household names in India, healthcare institutions, big chains, and I had no idea that they had been held to this kind of ransomware. But what I found entirely fascinating was that not just that we don't know whether the ransom was paid or not or how the data was retrieved, but that it's become so sophisticated that ransomware is now like a service you can rent. You have people that specialize in doing the ransom attack for you in case you don't know how to do it. And there's a customer service to help you pay ransom.
Yeah, there is. And, you can sort of flip it in terms of the coins because there's a better trail with Bitcoin. So you can choose a more anonymous coin. There's a little bit of a discount, same as the same thing that happened around demonetization where, you could, I don't know if you remember this story, but a lot of the commodity traders really made a killing during demonetization because they were switching your black money for white with a little bit of a discount. So the same thing is happening in the crypto market. And I think this is another sort of pointer to the global nature of it, Sandeep, which is that if you started tracking down a lot of this crime, just in terms of an online trail, leads to Eastern Europe. There's clearly a lot that's happening there by way of data theft or data ransom. And I think that's the tricky one, right? It's tricky to police someone who isn't even in your geographical limits.
And but in some ways, I assume that these people who want to hold your compute, hold your data to ransom, are doing it all over the world. Is India an easier target than most?
The simple answer is yes. It's happening all over the world. But I think what I was shocked when I spoke to a lot of insurance experts and a lot of legal experts was how rampant this is in India, especially so for public institutions. I think they are crying for some kind of upgrade. What is the skilling we provide to employees in these organizations to actually put in, safeguards to ensure it doesn't happen? What kind of upgradation are we doing for the underlying technology for many of these organizations? I know, many people will remember that AIIMS, which is the country's largest medical institution, was under an attack. All the data was held ransom. I mean, this is not to say it doesn't happen in other parts of the world. It's happened with the NHS in London as well. But just the scale of what we're talking about, and think for a second about an organization like AIIMS, right? Think of the kind of people that go there for medical attention. You have the most senior politicians. You often have other very, very senior level leaders. There is a lot of sensitive data there that could be compromised, and it was compromised. And the final thing I will say is that one sort of piece of observation I got from a legal expert is that 9 times out of 10, it is a human error. It's someone who, sort of forgot to leave, to lock their data, who kind of left it not password protected.
Did the COVID lockdown make it worse, Mitali, in terms of hybrid workplaces, work from home? I would assume that you're far less secured.
It's a great observation, and it's absolutely right. The moment things sort of spread out, it was very difficult to keep tabs on, whether people were following the same levels of hygiene that you expected from them. And I think that's where a lot of slips occurred at COVID time, Sandip.
You mentioned demonetization. I was interested to read in your book that actually demonetization was also a boom for crypto crimes. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and don't hate me, people from Gujarat, but it's sort of like everything starts in Gujarat, right?
But even way back before, in 2017, the place most curious about Bitcoin globally was Surat.
Listen, you can't keep Gujarat away from a money-making opportunity, right? Like, I'm not bashing it. I really mean it. I mean, even the most savvy traders in the stock market are generally the Gujarati community, right? They understand dhando. So it's kind of the same thing over here, where people saw an opportunity, people started dabbling around in crypto, and then demonetization was a great time to do that. Let's just park our cash there because there is a lot of cash available, and this looked like a really great, not asset, I hesitate to use that term, a really great instrument in which to place it.
You mentioned ransomware, but what does the rest of the sort of underbelly of crypto look like in India?
Ransomware is big, and ransomware tends to attack the large organizations. At a simple individual level, it just goes down to the same scams, Sandeep. The same scams that we often see on WhatsApp saying, click this link for trading opportunities, things like that. So you kind of build a community on WhatsApp, you get added to the community, you don't exactly know what it is, but people are discussing some, very great investment opportunity and you're intrigued. Or they do that on Telegram and, you want a piece of it, this looks like not a big lift from you. And I think that's where they are slowly drawn into the net. That's where a lot of their personal account details are sort of sought, or they share details of their own crypto account. I was speaking to a cybercrime officer in Mumbai, and she was talking about a case where someone came and said, 1 crore got stolen from my crypto account. Now, the problem is he himself had no idea how his account functioned. He couldn't log in. He'd been locked out of his account. He had invested in a crypto coin itself that seemed quite dubious. So your own investment to start off with wasn't quite legit or kosher, So how does the crime official or the crime police branch support you when you kind of did something that was in the gray zone? Now you've lost all your money.
In fact, somebody has the quote, right? I don't know if it's the same officer that you're talking about, saying They are both greedy, the complainant and the criminal.
It's the same officer, Rashmi Karandikar. That's right. And sorry, I just wanted to say another really big scamming routine, and that's not limited to India, to be fair, is the romance scams, where you sort of, somebody befriends you over your phone, starts, sort of getting more familiar and more friendly with you, and then either poses like this, I really need your help, or I'm into this, would you like to get a piece of this trading idea? And that's where people have tended to lose a lot of money as well. So much so that if you were to go on to, the US Federal Reserve site and they look at things like, data crime and crypto crimes, there's a huge mention of how to protect yourself from romance scams, as they're called.
Which just goes to show that these are the things that we are the most hungry for and the most vulnerable to. We are just human. It's a little, you can flatter anything out of me if you know how to flatter correctly. But obviously, this is something quite so universal, Mitali, as you mentioned. But when you were researching this book, did you find that there was something special about crypto crimes in India? Is there a sort of desi flavor that's unique?
I would say one desi flavor that's unique is very, very low understanding of what it is that you're getting into, Sandeep. Even for some of the younger people and the conversations I would have with them, it would be, pata nahi kya hai, par acha hai. It was a bit like that. So there was very, very low awareness. I think that has been a reason why you've generally seen a lot of scams around India over the years. If you thought of it like a pyramid, you do have this base level where people have low understanding. They are a bit more gullible and they can be sort of led down this path quite easily. I think the ransomware thing really bothered me because I think large organizations need to be more responsible about data, as a whole, but also what the hell is going on with some of India's premier institutions. I think that was a very sort of India phenomenon. And I think the third India phenomenon I would point to quite sadly is that there is a complete lack of understanding from the policy side, Sandeep. First of all, there is no clarity on whose problem this is. Is it the Reserve Bank's problem? Is it SEBI's problem? Is it neither of them? Should there be a third party overseeing this? Nobody knows. The second part of that is, what do we do with this? So the RBI says, this is horrible, let's ban it. But here you have the RBI introducing its own digital currency. On the other hand, you have the finance ministry saying, we're coming out with a crypto bill. Haven't seen that yet. It's been quite a few years. And the third part, of course, is crypto is great. Entrepreneurship is great. Let's encourage the entrepreneurs and then say, no, now this is bad. Now entrepreneurs, sit down, go away. We don't want you anymore. I think that's the very India phenomenon.
And I think it's also true, Mitali, that, and I include myself here, is that many of us, whether tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3 cities, don't really grow up very well trained in financial literacy. We don't get any training in school or anything in financial literacy. And then along comes something like crypto, which seems like a bright, shiny thing. But I don't know that we have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to grasp what we are getting into.
I think you're absolutely right. And you raise such an important point. I often say for kids who study business studies or accountancy or things like that, where you're choosing this as a specialization, how much are they taught about financial investment? I don't know. I know you don't need to do it anymore, but how many of them were even taken to a bank and shown, this is a deposit slip and here's how you actually submit a check and here's how it works. There's so little sort of practical knowledge, as you say, that I think it can be really harmful. During the IPL, when there were so many ads that we saw in a period of time around crypto, and then you had this nanosecond warning, which goes really fast, crypto, is subject to whatever risks and the thing. You don't know, you're not comprehending anything of what's being shared with you, So there is so little by way of actually making people understand what risks can mean, what safeguards mean. And as you said, just an environment or an ecosystem of discussing financial investment or the importance of savings or what makes something safer versus the other is just lacking.
One of the other things in terms of crime, Mitali, which I was surprised by, there's the connection between the dark web and crypto. But what I was surprised by was that you say India has a dark web problem. India accounted for 26% of the global population using the dark web in 2019. Can you explain that connection?
And I think, it's sort of an wide scoping term when you say dark web. So it involves a lot of things. And for a lot of people, they actually see this as a safety net where you can have conversations that you may not want to have on open web, which are safer spaces to discuss perhaps, sensitive topics.
They're like human. I mean, I think we should just back up here and say that the dark web in fact was created not for nefarious purposes, but for things like human rights organizations under sort of oppressive regimes to be able to exchange information.
Exactly right. Again, born of the United States, born for a completely different reason, born almost from the government in a way, and then sort of morphed into this creature. And I think the dark web now has become this open market for all kinds of things, So crypto is sort of the currency that's used, but one of the biggest uses for dark web is essentially to sell data and ID. There is a sizable amount in the dark web that is now used for drug trafficking. Again, on that, I got a lot of mixed opinion where some people said, yes, it's definitely grown. And some people said, you know what, it's such a sensitive topic that people still sort of rely on very close person-to-person contact while either asking for drugs or actually arranging a transfer and supply of it. But I was surprised by how commonly used it is. I mean, I've never used it till I sort of heard about this. And I think it's just a parallel universe that is running. And maybe, again, it goes back to the point about policy, Sandip, which is that everyone knows it's happening. It's, you're choosing to look away for whatever reason.
It sounds like one of those things in Star Wars where they go into this planet where you can buy anything, you can do anything. It sort of exists off the grid.
I think one of the reasons people were, sort of maybe even more kind of open while chatting with me, because they were very open, was probably like, okay, she's clearly stunned by whatever she's hearing. The mind was boggled.
Like my bank is harassing me every day about my KYC, and there is this world where I can go and buy somebody's KYC.
Yeah, absolutely. All available.
You talked for this book, you talked to so many crypto influencers, founders, traders. Did you get a chance to speak to any of the so-called crypto criminals?
I didn't. I tried in a couple of cases, but it just kind of hit a wall. And I think how this works really efficiently is complete anonymity. So a lot of my reach outs didn't go anywhere at all, to be like perfectly honest and candid about that. Nobody was willing to speak on record. Nobody was willing to speak off the record. And I will say also with a lot of them, they are still in litigation. So it's still sub judice.
And some of the more famous ones are dead, actually died in the course.
Yes, indeed.
Young people, fairly young people, right?
Yeah, it was quite sad with Amit Paj. I mean, his medical condition was sad. And now it's kind of up to his family to see where this goes in litigation. But I also feel incredibly bad for the number of people scammed.
You should explain a little bit about, for people who don't know Amit Paj, what he was accused of.
Yeah, so Amit Bhardwaj, and this is strange, like for a lot of people in the crypto universe, for all his faults, they believe he's the one who really made crypto the phenomenon that it was across India. He is one of those really grassroots tech entrepreneurs who tried a couple of different things and then really cottoned on to crypto as an idea and began building these lending schemes. Again, very, very popular with the bottom of the pyramid, where you come into a lending scheme. If I recommend you, for instance, I, earn a little bit of a premium on that. And that way you keep building this lending scheme, which is underpinned on crypto rather than cash or any other instrument. Amit did that very, very successfully till he began to start getting caught out. He built the lending scheme. He tried to introduce a crypto coin of his own. At one point, he was hugely influential with a lot of, the Bollywood literati. There are still traces on social media platforms like Twitter, where a lot of these Bollywood stars have gone on to say, Amit, you're amazing, and your book is amazing, and this is such a great idea. And people have responded to that saying, hey, do you know that Amit Bhardwaj is a scamster? He slowly, I don't want to reveal too much from the book, but he slowly got caught in his own net of wrongdoing. And then people started filing cases against him, all across the country. In fact, from Chandigarh to Maharashtra, there were a lot of cases filed against them, but they didn't go anywhere. I was struck by a quote that one of the litigants made, which is that when they did file that FIR, they had a conversation with Bhardwaj, who sort of said in a threatening tone, "Tum jahan jahan FIR karaoge, main wahan paise deke nikal jaunga. Wherever you file an FIR, I will ensure that I pay enough bribe to walk away. Do what you will." Amit was finally arrested, and then, cases were pressed against him, but he died a few years back of a kidney infection. So it is his mother and his brother that are now, they sort of remain the co-accused. But I think one quite canny thing he did was that they reconstructed it to make it be that only Amit was responsible for any of the crimes that were conducted, even though it was very much a family enterprise, as a lot of the data shows, so that he was the sole one responsible for it. So culpability can be sort of limited to him and not to the rest of the family.
As you mentioned, a lot of these crimes are all age-old crimes that bank in on people's greed, the need to make a quick buck, need to get very quick returns, and things like that. It's just that they're using crypto now as opposed to using other instruments or plain cash. Now, this term blockchain itself was confusing to me because a chain in my head implies that I can see where something's coming from and where something's going to. That, you follow the chain. What made crypto so difficult to track and so attractive for people who are trying to hide or, do things anonymously? Because I assume at some point, in order for you to actually make the money, you have to cash out. You have to convert it from this virtual crypto money into registered currency. Wouldn't you ultimately get caught?
You wouldn't if you were cashing out in a different currency and a different country. The other way to do it is to keep converting it into more and more anonymous currency and then finally cashing out. I think that's where the hitch in the system is, Sandeep, which is that ultimately, even if you argue for democratization, that cryptocurrency is going to become some kind of currency. Whether it's going to be a ruble or a yen or a dollar, it's going back into hard cash. And that, is where people find fault in it. Blockchain is, so much of what we do now with banking platforms or with other financial platforms is the underlying technology is blockchain. And I had many very long chats with the former Finance Secretary S.C. Garg. And that's the point that he made as well, that in conversations around policy, it's something that he tried to stress on, saying, look, let's try and understand the bigger block behind this. And the bigger block is blockchain. There is a technology here. It's clearly a powerful force. It's clearly in use. What can we do that is for good for blockchain? And then let's separate out what we do with crypto. But just on that point you're making about, you'll get caught somewhere, it's so funny, Sandeep, because after this whole taxing thing happened, right, there were big tax changes that the finance minister introduced. There's a 30% tax on crypto now, and that really, really came down very hard on trading sentiment. And I was speaking to some of the traders after that, and in their heads, it was still like, अच्छा ये बताओ, अगर मैंने क्रिप्टो कॉइन खरीदा, फिर मैंने दुबई से किसी दोस्त को बोला कि वो वहां पे पैसे निकाले, फिर वहां से पैसे निकाल के मैंने उसको बोला कैमरा खरीद ले, फिर वो कैमरा इंडिया ले आए, तो फिर तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. Like in the sense they were just trying to find solutions, let me trade externally. I'll ask a mate's mate to sort of get the money out. Then I'll buy something with it. So then there's no trail and I don't have to pay tax. So, you can tax things as long as, the cows come home. But if people want to find a way around it, they still are. And you'll see that now domestic trading exchanges have really seen a slump in volumes. It's growing again, but it's not growing as fast as it did. But what's happened? All those traders migrated to international platforms.
So in a sense, because this understands no geography, even when you're doing policy, that until you have international agreement on how to deal with this, it's always going to be difficult because there might always be a Bahamas or somewhere where ultimately that'll become your proverbial Swiss bank.
It's difficult, but it's not impossible to have some rules of the game in place. So I think the UK, Australia, certainly the UAE and Japan stands out as an example of, how can we structure this in a way that there is some accountability for what's happening, both from the exchanges in terms of, what they are gathering as data, from the platforms that are hosting particular coins. It's interesting, when the FTX collapse happened, Sandeep, world over people lost money. It's only in Japan that every FTX trader was able to cash out and get their money back because some rules had been put in place. Japan itself had been through a bad patch earlier with a Shiba Inu, incident. And that really prompted them to do more in terms of, how do we protect investors at least?
So what is the policy in India right now? I mean, there was the famous thing where the finance minister said that legitimate or illegitimate is a different question, but I will tax it because it's my sovereign right to tax. Is that the policy still?
It looks like it. We have a 30% tax in place, which is quite onerous. And I think that's made an impact on trading volumes. Other than that, it has neither been recognized as an asset nor as, something that is part of the financial system. We have a crypto bill that I think since 2019 or 2020 there's always been the promise of it being tabled, winter session, summer session, but you haven't really seen that yet. So no policy around that. And I think the last I checked, which was a couple of weeks back, Jayant Sinha, who's part of that sort of, special committee on digital technology, said, well, we don't have any news for you yet. RBI has, of course, gone ahead to introduce its digital currency, which is interesting, and let's see how that goes. The one development, I think, which is a telling sign, is that since the last year and a half, a lot of these large crypto exchanges have quietly picked up their headquarters and shifted them to other countries, whether it is Dubai or any place else. I think it's a sign of the fact that they're a bit exhausted with the lack of policy clarity. So I would say it's a big fat question mark with policy.
You talked to the former finance secretary, and do you think there is any truth to what many crypto evangelists say, that it gets a worse rap than it should because it rattles the banks? Because that is why the Reserve Bank came out so vehemently against it. What did the former finance secretary have to say about that?
I think he agrees with the fact that part of it is, you don't know what the beast is, so you'd rather look away from the beast rather than really engaging with it, saying, okay, let's understand this a bit better. What can we do around policy regulation? I think the other point he made, and that's a valid criticism, is that in India, a lot of the crypto conversation just got cornered by one small part of the pie, which is these crypto exchanges. So people started equating anything to do with crypto only with the 3 or 4 or 5 exchanges that exist at this point. So everything good or bad that was happening with them was meant to be everything good or bad about crypto. So it all became about talk to the crypto exchange entrepreneurs. What are they saying? What do they feel? What are they asking for? Not realizing that, as you said, there's a whole other universe, whether it is blockchain or everything else, that people tended not to engage with anymore.
But do you feel, Mitali, that in a country like India, which is heading more and more towards more centralization, not less, in many spheres, how does a decentralized system like crypto fit into the policy imagination of India?
So before policing it, you're going to have to spend time engaging with it. I think this is a hard lesson the US is learning, for example, where they've realized that what is coming at us with crypto is just a stream of litigation. And it's probably feeling pressure from there that crypto ETFs or exchange trading funds have now come into being in the US. They've realized that they need to open up the space a bit more. They need to allow this in a legitimate fashion. Otherwise, all they're going to do is be in court fighting cases, that are raising demands. I think a lot of people will have to sit around the table and really hear each other and really make space for,
They already sit around the table endlessly.
Yeah,
I don't know if they hear
apparently
each other.
They're not listening enough. Maybe they're talking more. And maybe, one starting point is like, okay, who's in charge of this conversation, right? Because the RBI says, we're in charge because we're the central bank. SEBI says, no, we're in charge because we look at all sort of financial investment options. And then you have the finance ministry that, as you rightly said, we're not sure what this is, but we're taxing it. Thank you very much.
Does crypto in India need its sort of Harshad Mehta scandal moment for people to wake up and say like, oh shit, we'd better get things in order?
I'm not sure. It's tough to say. Like, sort of little events are obviously happening and bubbling around. I think FTX that happened in the US is a huge and should be a huge wake-up call to policymakers, to people around the crypto universe. I spoke to someone who was employed by FTX, and it was really quite stunning for me to hear all of what was happening there. And he has actually switched gears now and works on the completely different side, which is trying to find the loopholes and, the flaws in crypto, because he feels that he is passionate about the technology, but he wants the technology to do good. And one way to do that is to constantly keep finding the flaws in it to ensure that regulation is checking what's going wrong.
Did you meet people like that in India, Mitali? I mean, because you spoke to people over the ups and downs of crypto, and did people now in what people are calling midst of crypto winter, are some of those people re-evaluating the role of crypto in their lives?
Some of them are, sort of re-evaluating what this whole universe looks like. It's also reflective, Sandeep, and it's not just for India. It's this whole, and I don't mean this in a sort of a, in a sexist way, but it's this whole tech bro code. Most often men involved in technology and really successful entrepreneurs are deified. So even with someone like Sam Bankman-Fried at FTX, for example, it was insane. Employees would get emails saying, when you're in a meeting, make sure you say something intelligent because SBF doesn't have time for something stupid. Make a very brief point, don't waste his time. To get time with him was a huge sort of, it was a brownie point to get his attention, to be part of his core team. So you kind of build this whole environment up where there is no space for critical thinking or to point out what's wrong. So much of what was happening in FTX, even from a regulation point of view, was how do we do external regulation when someone is coming in? It never stopped to think about how are we being regulated? What's wrong with us? How does someone point out flaws within the organization? I think that environment is missing within the crypto universe, and that's something that I hope they're rebuilding. A lot of them tend to be hugely optimistic about it. So this whole thing of crypto winter was like, that's fine. It happens every 4 years. Crypto goes through something called a process of halving. When that happens, which is happening this year, prices will shoot back up. I don't have a problem with it. Some people are sort of die-hard crypto believers, but some, I think, are going back to the drawing board saying, what can be correct about this?
In fact, one of the really interesting quotes that you have in the book is where I think one of the crypto traders tells you, it sounds nice, but the money you earn from crypto is not satisfying because it's easy money.
Yeah, and this is someone who's been trading for a long time now before it became really hot as it did in 2019-20. And he started out with small amounts, and he is in the creative space as well. And that comment really struck me because he said, it's not the same as me going out and doing a project. It's not the same high of earning something from having done productive work that I'm proud of. This is like a lazy pop. So it's helped me out, but it's not the same.
Did you invest in crypto?
No, not at all. when I'm asked that question, I quickly go back to the quote that, S.C. Garg gave me when I asked him. I said, will you? And he just flat out said, no, Mitali, this is about as ridiculous as believing in God. I said, okay, I'll take it.
In a country where millions of us do believe in one of the most God-fearing countries, you can understand perhaps now why crypto is so popular.
Our Bengali audiences will understand this word and the others will probably understand as well. I'm a complete bhitu, which is I'm very afraid while making financial decisions. So I will do the bare minimum in terms of risk. Like I'm really a tortoise. So I had absolutely no interest, even though a lot of the young traders told me, I'll show you how it's done. Kuch bhi nahi hai. This is the app. This is how you do it. I was like, listen, I'm very happy to just document your wins and successes. I have no interest.
Because your book goes into the pros and cons, but it is called Crypto Crimes. It's not called, the judging or analyzing or a guide to crypto. It is called Crypto Crime. Does that suggest that for you, the balance right now is more con than pro for crypto in India? No, I use con. It's a pun. I didn't intend
Yeah, that's a good one though. I think when I started off, to be very honest, Sandeep, it was a documentation of crime. It was like, let me see how bad this has gotten across India and what the sort of India flavor is to this. I think what I was struck by, as we are as journalists and reporters, is always the human story behind any of this, right? Whether it's technology, whether it is tragedy, whether it is hope. I think the best stories to tell are the human stories. And I kind of came away with that thinking, it's so easy to put people in binaries and say everyone who believes in crypto is bad and everyone who's policing it is good, or vice versa. But it's not like that. People are human. They function with a lot of human urges. One of the crypto entrepreneurs I spoke with, Ashish Singhal, I can say his name, he spoke so passionately about why he believed in it. And in the end, I finished the whole interview and then he said, but you didn't ask me, why I believe in it. And I thought, no, I didn't. I just sort of really interrogated you. And he said, I grew up in a middle class family. I grew up in a small town. I'm not saying that I didn't get what I needed. My parents provided for everything I needed. But I saw around me what it means to really live within very, very modest means, where you have to judge between should we buy a 1 liter packet of milk or a half liter packet of milk, depending on your monthly, household ration funds at that point. And that's something that made him really passionate about the idea of even opening that avenue of financial investment or making more money, or, what can we do to sort of democratize the process? It was a very human story and it really kind of lingered with me, In life, I think there are no binaries. And that was my takeaway.
Mitali Mukherjee, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. It's been so excellent. Thank you very much.
Award-winning political economy journalist Mitali Mukherjee is currently the director of the journalist programs at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. She's the author of the new book, Crypto Crimes, Inside India's Best Kept Secret. Let us know what you think about this show, wherever you get your podcasts from. Find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Express Podcast. No cryptocurrency needed. Thanks as always for listening. This show was produced by Shashank Bhargava and edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. This is Sandip Roy on Express Audio.